He walked into the charity gala like a guest, but his past walked in with him like a shadow. The smiles were polished, the music was beautiful, and the man he hated most stood there calling himself a benefactor. Beside him, a German shepherd froze, not afraid, not aggressive, just certain that something was terribly wrong. What began as a night of donations and speeches quietly turned into a test of faith, loyalty, and restraint. A Navy SEAL had to decide whether strength meant striking back or standing still and letting truth breathe. And when a child stepped into danger, it wasn't a man who moved first, it was the dog. If stories of quiet courage and unseen miracles matter to you, please like this video, subscribe, and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. The Palace of Dionysus, New Orleans. The dog stopped before the man did. Argos's paws froze on the marble floor, as if the stone itself had whispered a warning only he could hear. The leather leash went taut, a clean, sudden line of tension cutting through the soft chaos of the ballroom. Holden Rayner felt it instantly, felt it the way a soldier feels the shift in air before an explosion, the way muscle memory wakes before thought. He did not look down at the dog. He didn't need to. He already knew that something in the room had tilted out of alignment. The chandelier above them burned like a fallen constellation, its crystals dripping light onto tuxedos and silk gowns below. The old hotel in New Orleans, French bones, American scars, had been dressed for reverence tonight, a veterans' fundraising gala, they called it. Crystal glasses chimed like temple bells, and somewhere near the far wall, a violin sang too sweetly, the kind of sweetness that lingered just long enough to make a wary mind suspicious. The music wrapped itself around the room like honey over ash. Holden stood straight, as he always did, spine aligned as if an invisible hand still checked his posture. 40 years old, broad-shouldered, without bulk, his frame carried the quiet density of someone built for endurance rather than display. His hair was cut short, practical, brown darkened by the low light, with the first threads of gray claiming the temples. A disciplined stubble shadowed his jaw, outlining angles that had been carved by years of sun, salt, and restraint. His eyes, gray with a hint of blue, didn't wander. They assessed. They remembered. Silence clung to him like an old uniform. When he spoke, which was rare, humor came out dry and precise, sharpened just enough to cut without drawing blood. It was a survival skill he'd learned after the war, after jokes had become easier than explanations. Tonight, he hadn't planned on speaking much at all. At his side stood Argos. The German shepherd was nearly 7, large and powerfully balanced, his coat a disciplined blend of sable and black, clean and well-kept. His ears stood alert but not stiff, the posture of a working dog who knew the difference between noise and meaning. Argos's eyes, deep amber, intelligent and unsettlingly aware, tracked the room with a vigilance that never tired. His muzzle twitched once, then again. To Holden, that nose had always felt like a compass tuned not to north, but to truth. They had entered together, man and dog, a familiar silhouette among strangers dressed for charity and applause. Some guests smiled warmly at the sight of a service dog. Others looked away, embarrassed by the reminder that war did not always stay politely outside the ballroom doors. Holden didn't mind either reaction. He had learned long ago that discomfort was often the first honest emotion people felt. Holden. The voice was soft but carried weight. Evelyn Sloane crossed the room toward him with the calm confidence of someone who belonged wherever she stood. She was in her early 40s, tall without being imposing, her posture relaxed yet deliberate. Her hair, dark blonde with a natural wave, was pulled back neatly, exposing a face shaped by empathy rather than indulgence. Her skin held the faint glow of someone who worked too much indoors, but still found time for morning light. Her eyes, a steady green, were observant without being intrusive. She wore a simple evening dress, understated by design. Evelyn had learned that power did not need ornamentation. As the coordinator of the Veterans Foundation hosting the gala, she balanced budgets, egos, and grief with equal care. She smiled at Holden, and the smile carried history, shared meetings, shared silences, shared losses neither of them spoke of directly. Between them ran a quiet bond, undefined but resilient, woven from mutual respect and something gentler that neither dared to name too quickly. "You made it," she said, her tone warm, relieved. "I had backup," Holden replied, nodding slightly toward Argos. Argos gave a low, dignified huff, as if acknowledging his role in the operation. Evelyn's smile deepened, then faded just a touch as she noticed the tension in the leash. Her gaze flicked down to Argos, then back up to Holden's face. "He doesn't usually freeze like that," she said. "No," Holden answered, "he doesn't." That was when the man approached. Beckett Crowhurst moved through the crowd with practiced ease, the kind of ease that came from never having to wonder if he belonged. He was in his early 50s, tall, his build lean rather than athletic, his posture carefully cultivated to suggest humility without sacrificing authority. His hair was silvered at the temples in a way that looked curated rather than earned. His suit fit perfectly, expensive without shouting, and on his right hand gleamed a signet ring, dark metal, engraved with a symbol Holden couldn't immediately place, though the shape stirred something sour in his memory. Beckett's smile arrived before he did. It was warm, generous, almost paternal. His eyes, however, were cold, sharp blue, calculating, scanning faces the way a gambler scanned cards. "Holden Rayner," Beckett said, extending a hand. "I've heard so much about you. Men like you are the reason we do what we do." The words were polished, rehearsed, poured like syrup over the room. Holden did not take the hand right away. His gaze flicked, uninvited, to the ring. The shape, the weight of it. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory shifted, restless. "I love our soldiers," Beckett continued smoothly. "True heroes. It's an honor to support them." The phrase landed wrong. Not false, worse than that. Empty. Argos stepped forward. Not aggressively, not barking, just close enough. His nose pressed lightly against the side of Beckett's tailored jacket, right over the pocket. Argos inhaled deeply, once, twice. The leash tightened further. The room held its breath. Then Argos exhaled, loudly. Beckett laughed, startled but quick to recover. "Well," he said, amused, "looks like your friend here is hungry." The tension snapped. Laughter rippled across the nearby tables. Someone joked about spoiled dogs and gourmet treats. Beckett reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped piece of expensive sausage, waving it playfully. Holden's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "He's not hungry," Holden said calmly. "He just doesn't like people who hide food." The laughter grew louder, warmer. Beckett chuckled along, slipping the sausage back into his pocket, his eyes narrowing for half a second too long before smoothing again. He offered a polite nod to Evelyn and moved on, already greeting the next cluster of donors. The room returned to its rhythm: music, glass, applause. But something had cracked. Holden felt it settle in his chest, heavy and familiar. Argos remained tense, eyes tracking Beckett's retreating form until he disappeared into the crowd. Only then did the dog shift his focus elsewhere, toward the far end of the ballroom, near the service corridor. Holden followed the line of Argos's gaze and saw Marisol Trent. She stood near the security desk, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun, her tailored suit practical rather than decorative. In her late 40s, Marisol carried herself with the alert composure of someone who had spent years watching for problems before they arrived. Her face was sharp, her expression professional, but her eyes betrayed unease. She glanced toward the ballroom, then toward the doors leading outside, her jaw tightening. Argos's ears angled forward. Evelyn noticed it too. "Marisol," she murmured. "She doesn't look comfortable." "No," Holden said quietly. The violin reached a high, trembling note, then resolved into something softer. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken signals. Holden felt the familiar pull, the instinct to move, to check, to intervene. He had come tonight to honor the fallen, to stand quietly at the edge of remembrance. But the war had taught him that trouble rarely waited for permission. Argos took one deliberate step toward the exit. Holden led him. The leash drew forward, steady and insistent, like a hand on his chest, guiding him away from the light. The music faded behind them as they crossed the threshold into the dimmer corridor. The air changed, cooler, sharper. From outside, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of labored breathing. Then a scratch, metal against claw. Holden's hand tightened on the leash. "All right," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. "Show me." Argos pulled toward the parking lot doors, his body aligned with purpose, his tail low but determined. Whatever waited beyond the glass was not part of the Gala. It did not belong to the world of chandeliers and speeches, and it was calling for help. The rain in New Orleans did not fall so much as it hovered, a fine gray mist that settled on skin and stone alike, turning the parking lot behind the hotel into a muted mirror of lights and shadows. The doors swung shut behind Holden and Argos, and the music from the ballroom thinned into a distant pulse, like a memory already losing its edges. Here, the air smelled of wet concrete, exhaust, and something sharper. Fear, perhaps, or the metallic tang of panic. Argos moved first, pulling with a steady insistence that left no room for doubt. His body was rigid now, every muscle aligned toward a black SUV parked beneath a flickering security light. The dog's ears were forward, his tail low, his breath controlled. This was not excitement. This was recognition. Holden followed without hesitation, boots splashing softly through shallow puddles, his hand firm on the leash, his mind already narrowing to a point. The sound reached them before the sight fully registered. Labored breathing, uneven and shallow, punctuated by a faint scratching from inside the vehicle. Holden stopped just short of the driver's door, his chest tightening. Through the tinted window, he could make out the shape of a German shepherd curled awkwardly in the back seat. The dog inside, later he would learn his name was Juno, lifted his head with visible effort, his chest heaving. Even in the dim light, Holden could see the strain in the animal's posture, the way his neck craned against a collar pulled too tight, the way his body leaned instinctively toward the sound of approaching footsteps. Argos let out a low sound, not a growl, not a bark, but something closer to a warning breath. Holden crouched, pressing his palm lightly against the glass. The window was warm. "Hey," he murmured, his voice pitched low, controlled. "I see you." Juno's eyes flickered toward him. They were dark, intelligent, and painfully loyal. Despite the heat, despite the discomfort, the dog's tail thumped weakly once against the seat when footsteps echoed nearby. When another voice called out from the direction of the ballroom, Juno's ears twitched and his head lifted higher, hope flaring in a body that no longer had the strength to support it. Footsteps approached briskly. Marisol Trent emerged from between two rows of parked cars, her heels splashing through the rain without slowing her stride. Up close, her presence carried authority. She was tall, broad-shouldered, with a practical build shaped by years of long shifts and longer nights. Her dark hair was pulled tight, her expression focused, the lines at the corners of her mouth deepened by a lifetime of vigilance. "This vehicle?" she asked, already reaching for her radio. "Yes," Holden said. "There's a dog inside, overheated." Marisol's jaw tightened. She spoke quickly into the radio, requesting the manager on duty and emergency animal services, her tone clipped but controlled. A younger security officer hovered nearby, pale and uncertain, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "That's Mr. Crowhurst's SUV," the officer said quietly, as if the name itself carried weight. "He's one of the main donors tonight." Marisol shot him a sharp look. "And that's a living animal," she replied. Protocol doesn't change based on who owns the car. Still, the hesitation lingered. Keys were requested, calls were made, minutes stretched. Inside the SUV, Juno's breathing grew more ragged. Holden felt the familiar burn of restraint in his chest, the instinct to act immediately, to break the glass, to solve the problem with force, and accept the consequences later. It was an instinct forged in deserts and jungles, in places where delay meant death. He did not move. Argos stepped closer to the door, positioning himself between Holden and the SUV, his body still and grounded, as if reminding his handler of something important. Holden exhaled slowly. Control, he reminded himself. Control was also a form of protection. Evelyn Sloan appeared moments later, her dress damp at the hem, her expression calm but alert. She took in the scene in seconds, the dog in distress, the stalled response, the subtle panic beginning to ripple outward. "We need to open the vehicle," she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough authority to cut through the noise. "Under Louisiana animal welfare law and hotel liability policy. Now." Her words were precise, chosen with care. She wasn't arguing emotionally, she was laying out consequences. Marisol nodded, already signaling the manager, who hurried over with a key fob in hand, sweat beating at his temples. Before he could press the button, a familiar voice cut through the rain. "What's going on here?" Beckett Crowhurst approached with practiced concern, his coat draped perfectly over his shoulders, his hair untouched by the damp. He took in the scene with a quick scan, then frowned, an expression that looked almost genuine. "My dog," he said, stepping closer. "There's been a misunderstanding. The driver must have made a mistake." He knelt beside the window, tapping lightly on the glass. "Hey boy, it's all right." Juno's response was immediate. Despite the strain, despite the obvious discomfort, his tail wagged again, faster this time. He pressed his nose weakly toward the window, eyes fixed on Beckett with unwavering devotion. The sight struck Holden harder than he expected. Loyalty, he knew, could survive almost anything, even neglect. The manager unlocked the doors. Cool air rushed in as the back door swung open, and Marisol and Holden worked together to ease Juno out carefully. Up close, the dog was clearly underweight, his coat dull beneath the rain, his collar cinched far too tight against his neck. Evelyn fetched water, while Marisol loosened the collar, her movements efficient and gentle. Beckett hovered nearby, offering reassurances, thanking everyone repeatedly, his voice thick with gratitude. But when Juno stumbled slightly as he was helped onto the pavement, something flashed across Beckett's face. Irritation, sharp and fleeting, like a blade catching light. Argos watched everything in silence. The two dogs locked eyes for a moment. Argos stood tall and steady, rain darkening his fur, his posture unthreatening but resolute. Juno looked back with a mixture of fear and longing, his ears flattened slightly, his gaze searching. It was not submission, it was a question. Holden felt it then, a subtle shift, like a fault line forming beneath the surface. He had seen this look before, in men who had been trained to obey without being taught to choose. Juno was not weak. He was loyal in the wrong direction. A phone vibrated in Holden's pocket. He stepped aside, answering without taking his eyes off the scene. "Dad?" Milo's voice came through the screen, small and bright against the night. The boy's face filled the display, light brown hair falling into his eyes, freckles scattered across his nose, curiosity warring with concern. "Hey, buddy," Holden said, his voice softening. "What are you doing?" Milo asked. "You sound different." Holden glanced at Juno, at Argos, at the rain pooling around their feet. "Helping someone who's stuck," he replied. "Kind of like I was once. Only difference is, this one has a tail." Milo smiled, then frowned slightly. "Is he going to be okay?" "I think so," Holden said. "We're doing things the right way." When the call ended, Holden pocketed the phone and returned to the group. Juno had been settled under an awning now, water and shade offered, his breathing slowly evening out. Beckett thanked everyone again, promising it wouldn't happen twice, his charm settling back into place like a mask. As Beckett straightened, Argos stepped forward, just enough to brush past him. The dog's nose lifted, inhaling once, deep, deliberate. Holden felt the reaction before Argos gave any sign, a tightening in his own chest, a memory stirring uninvited. The smell was faint but unmistakable. Oil, metal, industrial solvents, the scent of warehouses and shipping crates, of places where corners were cut and contracts signed with bloodless hands. Argos's ears flicked. His gaze followed Beckett as the man turned away, oblivious. Holden stood very still in the rain, understanding settling over him like armor. This wasn't over. The wine room lay tucked beneath the hotel like a chapel built for secrets. Dark wood paneled the walls from floor to ceiling, polished to a low gleam that swallowed light rather than reflecting it. Bottles rested in lattice racks like relics, their labels yellowed with age, their necks dusted in reverence. The air was thick with oak, fermented fruit, and something older. History, perhaps, or the collective breath of deals made in whispers. Here, the music did not perform, it lingered. Evelyn led Holden through the narrow archway, her steps measured, unhurried. In this dimmer space, she looked different. Less the public steward of charity, more the woman shaped by long nights of compromise and conscience. The shadows softened the lines of her face, but they sharpened her eyes. She leaned closer to Holden, her voice barely more than breath. "He'll be here," she said. "Beckett doesn't like to talk numbers where applause can interrupt him." Holden nodded once. His presence filled the room quietly, the way a storm fills the horizon before anyone notices the wind. Argos walked at his heel, posture relaxed but alert, amber eyes reflecting the low light like watchfires. Somewhere behind them, laughter spilled from the ballroom, bright and careless, unaware of the weight settling in the wine room's corners. At the far end, a small semicircle of people had gathered. Beckett Crowhurst stood at its center, glass in hand, his voice smooth as polished marble. Beside him hovered a man Holden didn't recognize at first. Shorter, heavier, with thinning hair combed carefully over a widening scalp. His suit was expensive but worn nervously, as if he were unaccustomed to luxury and afraid it might notice. "That's Graham Pell," Evelyn murmured. "Board member, controls 3 donor blocks. He hates conflict, hates losing money more." Graham Pell's face bore the soft strain of a man perpetually trying to disappear while holding too much responsibility to succeed. His cheeks sagged slightly, his eyes darted often, and his hands never quite stopped moving, adjusting cuffs, smoothing his tie, touching the stem of his glass. He listened to Beckett with the attentive anxiety of someone who knew, on some level, that he was being steered. And then there was the music. A single violin rose above the murmur, not loud, not showy. The melody threaded through the room like smoke, curling around conversations, slipping between pauses. The man playing stood near a pillar, his back straight despite his years. Warren Pike was in his late 60s, tall and spare, his frame still carrying the discipline of service, even as time had carved its lines into his face. His hair was white now, pulled back neatly, his fingers long and steady on the strings. Warren's eyes were closed as he played, but not in performance. It was the look of someone listening deeply, to the instrument, to the room, to memories that did not ask permission before resurfacing. His suit was plain, his shoes worn. Nothing about him demanded attention, and yet the music bent the space subtly toward him, like iron filings to a magnet. Holden felt it before he understood it. Recognition. He waited until Beckett's laughter crested, until a ripple of agreement passed through the group. Then he moved, not toward the donors but toward the violinist. His steps were unhurried, deliberate. Argos followed, stopping a respectful distance away, settling into a sit with the ease of long training. Warren's bow slowed as Holden approached, the melody tapering into a final, unresolved note. The older man opened his eyes and met Holden's gaze without surprise. There was something appraising there, but also something kind. "That was for them," Holden said quietly, "the ones who didn't make it back." Warren's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "They're the only audience that matters." No handshake followed. None was needed. Two men who had worn uniforms long enough learned to recognize each other by posture alone. Warren resumed playing, but now the tune shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Holden noticed the repetition, the way certain measures returned, the way pauses fell at precise intervals. Evelyn noticed too. She didn't react outwardly, but her mind caught the pattern the way it always did, filing it away. She edged closer to Holden, her shoulder nearly brushing his arm. "Microphone on the stage," she whispered. "Better acoustics than the room cameras." Holden exhaled through his nose, a humorless breath. He had known men like Warren, men who found ways to speak without being heard, to record without holding a recorder. Not magic, just skill, patience, and the quiet refusal to let truth evaporate. Across the room, Beckett's voice dropped. "Medical equipment, of course," he was saying, tone benevolent. "High grade, life-saving, the kind of thing donors love to hear about." "And the paperwork?" Graham Pell asked, his voice tight. "The last batch was complicated." Beckett smiled, indulgent. "Everything looks cleaner when the right signatures are in place. A few adjustments, that's all. We take care of our own." Holden felt heat rise behind his ribs. He shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. Argos sensed it instantly. Without looking up, the dog leaned forward and pressed his nose gently against Holden's knuckles. The contact was brief, deliberate, grounding. "Not tonight," the gesture said. "Not like this." Holden stilled. That was when Juno appeared. A handler led the other German shepherd across the edge of the room, leash taut, posture rigid. Under the softer light, Juno looked smaller than he had in the parking lot, his ribs faintly visible beneath his dark coat. The marks on his neck were clearer now, angry red impressions where the collar had bitten too deeply. His ears flicked nervously at the sound of applause, his tail wagging uncertainly as guests smiled and reached out, careful not to touch. Beckett turned, clapping a hand on the handler's shoulder. "That's my boy," he said loudly. "Resilient, isn't he?" Juno's head snapped toward the sound of his voice. His tail wagged harder, a reflex carved too deep to question. For a moment his eyes met Holden's across the room. There was no challenge there, only confusion, and something like hope, still clinging, stubborn as a weed in concrete. Holden swallowed. He saw with sudden clarity that this was not just about money or contracts. It was about ownership, the way some men believed loyalty could be extracted, deserved, even when it was purchased with neglect. The music swelled, Warren's bow drawing the sound out longer now, the rhythm steady, the timing exact. Evelyn's phone vibrated softly in her hand as audio synced, unseen but active. Then, just as the room seemed to settle back into its performance, Graham Pell spoke again. "And if someone starts asking questions," he asked too casually, "a veteran, say, someone with concerns." Beckett's smile did not falter. "Then we remind them who signs the checks. And if necessary, we make sure their behavior speaks louder than their words." Holden felt Argos tense beside him. The words were not a confession. They were worse. They were a strategy. The moment passed. Laughter returned. Glasses clinked. Juno was led away. Warren's melody softened into something almost mournful, as if the violin itself understood what had been said and did not approve. Later that night, after Holden and Evelyn had left the wine room and the gala wound toward its elegant close, the first video appeared online. The headline spread faster than the truth ever did. "Former SEAL causes disturbance at charity event," it read. "Donor threatened." The clip was short, cropped, edited. It showed Holden's broad frame, his face caught mid-expression, his voice raised, but not its context, not Argos's calming presence, not the measured restraint that had defined every moment. By morning, the comments had decided who he was. Holden watched the video in silence, the glow of his phone cold against his face. Argos lay at his feet, eyes open, steady. The music from the night before echoed faintly in his memory. This, Holden realized, was only the beginning. The hallway outside the ballroom gleamed like an operating room scrubbed too clean to feel human. White marble floors reflected faces the way water reflects a sky before a storm, distorted just enough to hide the truth. The lights overhead were harsh, unflinching, designed to expose imperfections. Holden Rayner walked down that corridor with the same measured stride he'd used entering combat zones years ago, shoulders squared, spine locked, expression unreadable. But inside him, something churned. Not rage, not fear, something colder. The awareness that reputation, once punctured, bled faster than flesh. Behind closed doors, the gala continued. Applause swelled and receded. Laughter bubbled like champagne foam. But out here, the tone had shifted. Whispers replaced music. Phones glowed in hands like small, judgmental suns. A few guests glanced at Holden as he passed, some curious, some cautious, some already convinced they knew who he was. Evelyn Sloane stood near the wall, arms folded loosely, posture controlled. Up close, the strain showed. Her face, usually composed, carried the fine cracks of pressure, tightened lips, a crease between her brows that deepened with each vibration of her phone. She had been pulled into a side meeting minutes earlier, ushered into a quiet room where voices rose and fell like waves striking rock. "They're panicking," she said softly when Holden reached her. "If Beckett pulls funding, half the donors will follow. They want distance. Fast." Holden nodded once. He had expected as much. Money frightened people more than lies ever could. From the corner of the hallway, Graham Pell emerged, blotting his forehead with a handkerchief. Under the unforgiving lights, he looked smaller than he had in the wine room. His shoulders slumped, his expensive suit hanging on him like borrowed armor. His eyes darted between Evelyn and Holden, unable to settle. "This is unfortunate," Graham said, forcing a thin smile. "We all respect your service, Holden, truly, but optics matter. The board feels it would be best if you stepped away for the remainder of the evening." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "He didn't do anything." Graham flinched. "That's not the point. Beckett is sensitive and generous." The word generous landed like a bribe. Evelyn inhaled slowly. Images rose unbidden. Her brother lying pale beneath hospital lights years ago. A machine beeping where certainty should have been. The device meant to support him had failed. The program that supplied it had been lauded as a triumph of charitable efficiency. The investigation had gone nowhere. The donors' names had remained untarnished. "I've heard that word before," she said quietly. "It didn't save my family." Graham's mouth opened, then closed. He looked away. The decision was made without ceremony. Holden was escorted, not forcibly, but firmly, toward the exit by a junior staffer whose hands trembled around a clipboard. Marisol Trent watched from the security desk, her jaw clenched. She met Holden's eyes briefly and gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of her head. He understood. Her report would say what it could. It would not be enough. Outside, the night air felt heavier than before. Holden stopped just beyond the doors, Argo settling at his side with a quiet huff. The dog's presence was steady, grounding, a reminder that truth existed whether people acknowledged it or not. Holden's phone buzzed. At home, Milo sat on the edge of his bed, tablet propped against his knees. The glow lit his young face unevenly, casting shadows that made him look older than his years. His hair was still damp from a rushed shower, his pajama shirt wrinkled. "They're saying things about you," Milo said without preamble. His voice wobbled, then steadied, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Kids at school shared it." Holden sat on the curb, rain seeping through the fabric of his pants. "What kind of things?" "That you yelled? That you scared people?" Milo hesitated. "That you're dangerous." The word cut deeper than any headline. Holden forced a breath, then a smile he knew Milo could hear, even if he couldn't see it. "Buddy," he said, "your old man once bought a year's worth of cereal because a coupon looked legit. So questioning my judgment is statistically reasonable." Milo snorted despite himself, then grew serious again. "Are you a bad guy?" Holden closed his eyes. Argos leaned closer, pressing his shoulder against Holden's knee. "No," Holden said, "but sometimes bad guys are better at telling stories." When the call ended, Holden stayed seated for a long moment, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of it all settle where it always did, low in his chest, near the heart. Inside the hotel, Evelyn stood alone now, the meeting dispersed. She didn't wait. She moved. Her first call went to a number she had saved years ago, but hoped she'd never need again. Dana Mercer answered on the second ring. "Mercer," the woman said, her voice even, edged with fatigue. Dana was in her late 40s, her hair cut short in a no-nonsense style, her face lined by years of reading balance sheets the way others read crime scenes. As a financial crimes investigator, she carried herself with quiet authority, no wasted motion, no wasted words. "I need someone who follows money," Evelyn said, "and doesn't blink when it points somewhere ugly." There was a pause. "Can you bring me something that stands up in court?" "I'm working on it." "Then call me when you have more than smoke." Evelyn did not argue. She understood the rules of this war. Her second call went to Omar Klein. Omar answered from a workshop that smelled of oil and old paper, his voice roughened by years of cigarettes he'd quit but never forgiven. A former NCIS investigator turned private consultant, Omar was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with a beard streaked heavily with gray and eyes that missed very little. He had left federal service after one compromise too many, choosing obscurity over obedience. "I need chain of custody," Evelyn said. "No shortcuts." Omar chuckled once. "Then you're calling the right person. What are we looking at?" "Charity, equipment, warehouses." "Those are my favorite kind of lies," Omar replied. "They always leave receipts." By the time Holden returned home, Evelyn had already laid the groundwork. He listened in silence as she explained. No dramatics, no promises. Just facts, paths, options. "This stays clean," Holden said when she finished. "I don't kick doors anymore." Evelyn nodded. "Good, because doors aren't the weak point." They sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold between them. Argos lay beneath Holden's chair, ears twitching at every word. When Omar's message came through, a text with a location pin and a single line, Argos lifted his head abruptly. "Got something," Holden read aloud. "A shipment route. Beckett's donations passed through a warehouse near the wetlands." At the word warehouse, Argos rose to his feet, body alert, tail still. His eyes fixed on Holden, intense, purposeful. Holden felt it, the click of a switch flipping deep inside him. Somewhere, the circuit breaker of honor had been thrown, and the lights, at last, were coming back on. The road out of New Orleans thinned gradually, streetlights surrendering to darkness one by one, until the city felt like a rumor behind them. The warehouse district rose from the wetlands without ceremony. Corrugated metal, rusted gates, sodium lamps humming like tired insects. The air here carried weight. Mud, salt, stagnant water, diesel. Secrets did not shout in places like this. They waited. Holden Rayner did not lead. That choice mattered. He drove, yes, hands steady on the wheel, posture upright as ever. But the night's rhythm belonged to Omar Klein. Omar sat in the passenger seat, broad frame filling the space, beard silvered and uneven, as if he'd stopped caring where age chose to land. His eyes were sharp, trained by years of federal work to read absence as clearly as presence. This was not a raid. This was reconnaissance, done clean, done patient. Evelyn followed in a separate car, headlights distant but constant, her role precise. She was not here to confront, not to accuse. She was here to witness, to anchor the truth to names and documents rather than fists. That discipline cost her something. She felt it in her chest every mile. But she had learned the hard way that righteous anger alone left no paper trail. Argos lay in the back seat, head lifted, nose working steadily. His breathing was slow, deliberate, the cadence of a dog in a working trance. Every few seconds his ears twitched, tracking information the humans could not access. To Holden, Argos felt less like a companion tonight and more like a guide. Hermes without wings, leading by scent rather than myth. They parked a quarter-mile from the warehouse, lights off. The building itself squatted beside the wetlands, half swallowed by reeds and shadow. A chain-link fence circled it, patched in places where repairs had been rushed. Trucks idled nearby, their engines cooling, ticking softly. "Remember," Omar said quietly, stepping out and adjusting the collar of his jacket. "We observe. We document. We don't cross lines that make judges nervous." Holden nodded. "I'm the fence," he replied. "You're the pen." Omar snorted once. "That's the nicest thing anyone's called me all week." They split roles with minimal movement. Omar moved first, camera concealed but ready, documenting license plates, timestamps, the rhythm of arrivals and departures. Evelyn stayed back, recording from public vantage points, logging dates and vehicle numbers against manifests she already knew by heart. Holden remained visible but neutral, positioned where he could be seen without appearing threatening, a presence that discouraged shortcuts without provoking confrontation. Argo sat beside him, still as stone. That was when the warehouse door creaked open and a young man stepped out. Toby Raines looked like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. Mid-20s, lean to the point of fragility, his shoulders hunched forward as if bracing for impact that never quite came. His hair was dark and perpetually disheveled, curls flattened by sweat beneath a faded cap. A reflective vest hung loosely on his narrow frame, stained with oil and dust. When he noticed Holden and Argos, he froze, eyes wide, hand tightening reflexively around the cigarette he hadn't lit. "I'm not supposed to talk," Toby said before anyone asked, his voice rough and too fast. "I didn't see anything, I just—" Holden raised an open palm, slow and non-threatening. "Nobody's asking you to talk," he said. "You stepped out for air, that's all." Toby swallowed. His gaze flicked to Argos, then back to Holden. Something in the dog's calm seemed to settle him. He exhaled, shoulders dropping a fraction. "They say it's charity," Toby muttered. "The labels, the paperwork, but the crates don't match." Omar drifted closer, casual, hands visible. "How so?" Toby hesitated, then pulled a folded sheet from his pocket, edges greasy, creased from being opened too many times. "Shipping schedules," he said, "public ones. But the internal logs don't line up. Weights off, serial numbers repeat." He tapped the page with a shaking finger. "I flagged it once. Supervisor told me not to ask questions if I wanted to keep my job." Evelyn stepped closer now, her voice gentle but firm. "What are you afraid of, Toby?" His eyes glistened. "That someone's going to die because a machine fails, and that I'll know I helped it happen." That was enough. Omar took the papers without comment, photographing them in place before sealing them carefully into an evidence sleeve. "You did the right thing," he said, "and you didn't break any rules doing it." Toby nodded, relief and terror warring across his face. He glanced back toward the warehouse door. "They keep a separate bay," he added quickly. One that doesn't show up on inspections. Numbers get adjusted. Argos stood, not abruptly, not aggressively. He simply rose, nose lifting, body angling toward the edge of the wetlands. Holden followed the dog's line of sight and saw it, a dark shape near the waterline. A crocodile lay half submerged in the mud, eyes closed, motionless, ancient as the marsh itself. Argos stared. The crocodile did not move. Holden sighed. "Great," he murmured. "Tonight everyone wants to do security." The crocodile, mercifully, did not object. The moment broke the tension just enough for breath to return. Evelyn allowed herself a small, incredulous smile. Toby let out a shaky laugh and disappeared back inside, shoulders straighter than before. Then headlights flared. A security vehicle rolled in fast, followed by another. Doors opened. Men stepped out, not uniformed police, but close enough. Off-duty cops, hired muscle, posture aggressive, hands resting too casually near their belts. One of them called out, "Sir, step away from the fence." Holden complied immediately, palms open, movements deliberate. Argos remained at his side, calm but alert. Omar raised his hands slightly, camera already recording. "We're on public property," Omar said evenly. "Observing, that's all." "Not according to our client," the man replied. "You're being detained for trespassing." Holden felt the old instinct flare, the urge to correct posture, to assess angles, to calculate exits. He did none of it. Instead, he remembered Mercer's message, the one Evelyn had read aloud earlier. "Don't resist. Let them show their hand." Argos shifted closer to Holden's leg, body pressed firm and reassuring. His eyes never left the men approaching, but his stance was not hostile. It was protective. Holden lowered his gaze briefly, resting a hand on Argos's head. "Easy," he murmured. "We're good." As his wrists were guided, not roughly but deliberately, behind him, Holden looked past the lights, past the warehouse, toward the dark wetlands breathing quietly in the distance. This wasn't an ending. It was exposure. The ballroom had been rearranged overnight, not in structure, but in intention. Rows of chairs faced a modest stage now, microphones aligned like sentries beneath the glare of professional lighting. The chandeliers still glittered, but their light felt harsher, less forgiving, as if every crystal had been repurposed into an eye. This was no longer a celebration. It was containment. A scheduled press briefing, a reassurance meeting for donors and partners, designed to calm nerves and reset narratives. Everyone present understood the unspoken rule. Tonight was about appearances. Holden Rayner entered without announcement. He wore the same dark jacket as before, pressed but unadorned, his posture straight, his presence unmistakable. At 40, his face bore the quiet erosion of years spent carrying responsibility rather than accolades. His jaw was set, stubble shadowing angles that suggested restraint rather than aggression. He did not scan the room for enemies. He did not clench his fists. He simply stood where he was meant to stand, visible, unflinching, like a wall that did not need to advance to be effective. Argos walked at his side, gait calm and deliberate. The German shepherd's coat gleamed beneath the lights, sable and black catching reflections as he moved. His ears were upright, his eyes steady, not searching for threats, but registering truth. To those who knew dogs, Argos read as something rare, a protector who had learned patience without losing instinct. Evelyn Sloane joined Holden moments later. She took her place beside him with practiced ease, shoulders squared, chin level. Tonight, she wore no jewelry beyond a simple chain at her throat. Her hair was pulled back tightly, exposing a face that showed neither fear nor anger, only resolve. What bound her to Holden now was not romance, not even hope, but necessity. They stood together the way miners stand shoulder to shoulder underground, sharing a single beam of light between them. Along the back wall, half in shadow, Dana Mercer waited. Mercer did not look like anyone's idea of a hero. She was dressed plainly, dark blazer over a neutral blouse, her short hair already flecked with gray despite her late 40s. Her posture was relaxed, hands folded loosely, but her eyes tracked every movement with clinical precision. Years of investigating financial crimes had taught her patience. Paper trails did not bleed, they accumulated. Around her stood two plainclothes colleagues, indistinct by design, ready but unobtrusive. Omar Klein lingered near the side entrance, broad frame partially obscured by a pillar. His beard had been trimmed for the occasion, though the gray still dominated. He carried himself like a man used to standing at the edge of storms rather than inside them. In his jacket pocket rested a flash drive, unassuming and devastating. The murmurs rose as Beckett Crowhurst stepped onto the stage. He was immaculate, as always. His tailored suit fit like a promise, his silver hair catching the light just so. He smiled broadly, arms opening as if to embrace the room. "My friends," he began, voice rich and confident, "thank you for coming. I know recent events have been unsettling." He spoke of commitment, of transparency, of love for veterans. The words flowed smoothly, each one polished to a shine. Heads nodded, cameras clicked. Beckett's eyes flicked briefly toward Holden, then away, as if dismissing a minor inconvenience. "And let me be clear," Beckett continued, tone shifting subtly. "We will not allow disruptive behavior to undermine the good work we do here." A ripple moved through the audience. Holden felt it like a breeze across his neck. Beckett gestured gently, and a security handler began leading Juno into view. The German Shepherd walked stiffly, leash taut. Under the lights, his injuries were harder to ignore. The fur around his neck lay uneven, thin in places, the skin beneath still healing. His posture was obedient but tense, eyes flicking constantly toward Beckett, seeking instruction, approval, permission to exist. "This," Beckett said warmly, resting a hand briefly on Juno's head, "is resilience." Holden's chest tightened. He took a breath, slow and controlled. At the far side of the room, a small cluster of chairs had been arranged for families. Milo sat among them, legs swinging slightly above the floor. He wore a clean button-down shirt, his hair combed neatly, though a stubborn lock fell into his eyes. Beside him sat Kendra Shaw, the social worker assigned to his adoption case. Kendra was in her mid-30s, slender, with warm brown skin and expressive eyes that missed very little. Her posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of someone accustomed to safeguarding children in rooms full of adults who forgot them. Milo leaned forward, curiosity bright on his face. That was when Beckett changed the tempo. He turned, voice sharpening just enough to cut. "Some individuals," he said, "confuse service with entitlement. They believe their past excuses their present conduct." His gaze locked onto Holden. Holden did not move. Beckett's hand tightened subtly on the leash. Juno flinched. The handler tugged, angling the dog closer to the stage edge, too close to where Milo had stood up, curiosity drawing him forward for a better look. Time slowed. Juno saw Milo before anyone else did. The boy's small frame, the way he stood uncertainly, the way his eyes widened at the towering figures around him. It struck something deep in the dog, something older than training, older than fear. Juno's body tensed, not with aggression, but with decision. He stepped sideways, the leash snapped taut. The handler stumbled, surprised. Juno planted himself directly between Milo and the stage, his body a living barrier. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stood, legs braced, head lifted, eyes steady. The room fell silent. Argos moved then, positioning himself beside Juno, not confronting but aligning, shoulder to shoulder. Two working dogs, one seasoned, one wounded, standing as equals. Holden felt something break open in his chest. Beckett shouted for control, his composure cracking. Cameras swung wildly. Voices rose. Evelyn stepped forward. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying without effort. "This ends now." She nodded once. Omar moved. Dana Mercer stepped out of the shadows. "Beckett Crowhurst," Mercer said calmly, holding up her badge. "You are being detained pending investigation into fraud, falsification of records, and endangerment." Gasps erupted. Beckett laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "This is absurd." Holden spoke then, his voice low but clear. "Medical equipment shipments, altered logs, donor funds rerouted, audio recorded last night, time synced, verified." Omar passed the flash drive to Mercer. She did not look at it yet. She did not need to. She had waited long enough to recognize the weight of truth when it arrived. Beckett's face drained of color as officers moved in. As his wrists were cuffed, he turned desperately toward Juno. "Come here," he ordered. Juno looked at him. Then Juno turned away. Not slowly, not in defiance, simply in certainty. Beckett was led off stage, his voice lost in the rising hum. As the room struggled to recover its breath, Mercer leaned close to Holden. "This man," she said quietly, "was a front. The ring he wears, it's not unique." She slipped a photograph into his hand. Another signet, another symbol. "There are others." Holden closed his fingers around the image. Argo sat at his side, watchful. The night had not ended. It had only changed shape. Morning arrived quietly, as if the city itself were careful not to wake what had just been laid to rest. New Orleans breathed beneath a thin veil of mist, the streets damp and reflective, carrying the muted gold of early light. The hotel behind them, once a palace of chandeliers and speeches, now looked ordinary, almost tired. Its grandeur had slipped back into stone and glass, leaving only the residue of truth and exhaustion. Holden Rayner stood at the edge of the sidewalk, hands in his jacket pockets, watching dawn pull the night apart piece by piece. He had been cleared, not with fanfare, not with applause, but with a series of quiet corrections, statements retracted, videos contextualized, accusations dissolved under the weight of evidence. His name, once dragged through headlines, now settled back into place. Honor restored, the reports would say. But Holden knew better. Honor wasn't something you got back. It was something you carried forward, heavier where it had been tested. Evelyn Sloan joined him, a paper cup of coffee in each hand. She looked tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Dark circles beneath her eyes, shoulders slightly slumped now that no one was watching. In the pale light, her strength showed not as steel, but as endurance. "I wanted to hit him," Holden said without preamble, eyes still on the street. "Every part of me did. That language comes fast to men like me. War teaches it early." Evelyn didn't flinch. She nodded once, understanding without judgment. "And you didn't?" "No," he replied. "I stood still. That was harder." She considered him for a moment, then spoke, her voice low. "I never told you why this mattered so much to me. Not just the work." Holden turned slightly, giving her his full attention. "My brother," she said. "He was a veteran, injured overseas. The rehab center he was sent to used equipment from a charitable program. It failed. They said it was an anomaly. No one was held accountable." Her jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "I learned then how easily good intentions can be used like perfume, strong enough to hide rot." They stood in silence, the truth settling between them. What bound them now was not romance, not heroics, but alignment. Two people choosing the same hard road again and again. Across town, a small apartment stirred. Milo Rayner sat at the kitchen table, legs dangling, fingers wrapped around a mug of cocoa that had long since gone lukewarm. He watched Holden move through the doorway, Argos padding in beside him, and something inside the boy eased. Milo rose quickly, guilt written plainly across his young face. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have doubted you." Holden crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled him into a hug, firm and grounding. "Kid," he said softly, "I once bought 3 months of the wrong cereal because I trusted a coupon that looked official. Doubting me is statistically sound." Milo laughed, a wet, relieved sound. Holden pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. This time, when he smiled, it reached them. They arrived at the clinic just as the sun cleared the rooftops. Dr. Paige Holloway met them at the door, sleeves already rolled up, her movements brisk but gentle. She was in her early 40s, tall and athletic, with dark hair pulled into a loose braid that brushed the back of her lab coat. Her face bore the calm focus of someone who had learned to work with frightened creatures without absorbing their fear. Years as a veterinary behaviorist had taught her that healing began long before diagnosis. Juno stood uncertainly beside her, leash slack but present. In daylight, the scars along his neck were unmistakable, pale grooves where skin had been compressed too long. His coat, once glossy, looked dull with stress. Yet his eyes followed every movement, alert, searching. Paige knelt, hands slow and visible. "You're safe," she murmured, not expecting the dog to understand the words so much as the tone. As she examined him, she spoke to Holden and Evelyn in a measured cadence. "What you saw last night wasn't betrayal. Dogs don't switch loyalty the way people imagine. Juno made a choice under stress. That's not defiance, that's recovery." She adjusted the collar, loosening it further. Juno exhaled, a long, shuddering breath he seemed to have been holding for years. Kendra Shaw arrived shortly after, her clipboard tucked beneath one arm. In the clear light of day, she looked younger than she had the night before, mid-30s, slender, her hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. Her eyes were warm but assessing, trained to weigh safety against hope. "Fostering is the best option," she said. "Temporary, structured, no pressure." Holden nodded. "No rush. He needs space." Argos approached then, slow and deliberate. He circled Juno once, nose low, reading a story written in scent rather than words. Juno stood still, uncertain, then leaned forward just slightly. Their noses touched. It wasn't dramatic, no growl, no wagging, just contact. A quiet exchange of recognition, like 2 soldiers acknowledging the same weathered insignia. Argos stepped back, satisfied, and sat. Paige smiled. "That," she said, "is acceptance." They walked together afterward, the city stretching awake around them. 2 German shepherds moved side by side, one steady and seasoned, the other tentative, learning again how to place his paws. Holden walked with Milo at his side, the boy's hand brushing his jacket now and then. Reassurance disguised as accident. Evelyn walked a step ahead, sunlight catching her silhouette, illuminating the path forward. At the corner, a familiar figure waited. Dana Mercer stood beside an unmarked car, coat buttoned against the morning chill. She held out a photograph without ceremony. Another hand, another signet ring. "Crowhurst was convenient," she said. "Not unique." Holden took the photo, folded it carefully, and slid it into his pocket. He looked down at Argos, then at Juno, who paused to sniff the air, orienting himself to a world that no longer hurt. Gatekeepers, Holden thought, weren't always loud. Sometimes they just stood where they were needed and let the light in. Sometimes the miracle doesn't arrive like thunder from the sky. It arrives quietly, disguised as instinct. As a dog that knows when to stand still. As a human who chooses restraint over rage. as truth that survives the night and waits patiently for the light. If God still speaks in this world, perhaps He does not always use words. Perhaps He speaks through moments of conscience, through the pull in our chest that says, "This is wrong," and through the courage to listen when that voice is inconvenient. In our daily lives, we face smaller versions of the same choice: to stay silent or to stand where we are needed, to react with anger or respond with integrity, to protect what is right, even when no one is applauding. May this story remind you that strength does not need to shout, that loyalty, when guided by love and truth, becomes a kind of grace, and that sometimes God places us exactly where we must be, not to fight, but to guard the light until others can see it too. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with someone who may need a reminder tonight. Leave a comment and tell us what moment spoke to you most. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories of quiet courage, faithful hearts, and unseen miracles. And may God bless you, protect you, and walk with you through whatever night you are facing until your own dawn arrives.